Hello everyone, my name is Dr. Fergal Armstrong and welcome to Lifestyle Matters. And once again we have the good Dr. Savina with us. Hi Savina.
Hi Fergal, how are you?
I'm well. So today we're going to talk about exercise in the elderly, and also we're going to touch on disability and exercise as it applies to longevity. So we've got a lot to pack in. So first of all, exercise in the elderly. What's your initial thoughts about that concept?
So I think exercise in the elderly is commonly viewed as, gosh, I'm getting old. I can't exercise. I don't want to go to the gym. There are all these young people with their fancy outfits, lifting, pumping their heavy weights, and they feel, a little bit afraid going to the gym and intimidated, which I
Yeah.
completely understand.
Yeah.
But really, as we discussed before, exercise doesn't always have to be at the gym, firstly.
Yeah.
And secondly, any type of exercise is going to be great for people at any stage. So I find when have gone to the gym, I find the older people tend to go to the gym when it's not peak hour. And that's how they try to go to the gym and not feel intimidated by others. So that's one tip I found. But the recommendations for exercise in the elderly, Fergal, what do the guidelines suggest for
Well,
those
I
above
suppose
65 years old?
if I could summarize it in one statement, I would say that the guidelines for exercise for those people over 65 are the same as those under 65, insofar as you can manage it. So you should aim to be doing the same amount if you can manage it, all right? So let's break that down a bit. So, what do you think in terms of aerobic exercise per week? How much should we be doing if we're over 65?
So we don't actually have to do it, in one whole block of 30 minutes. We can break it up as however we can tolerate. So may it be 5-minute blocks, 10-minute blocks, however you feel you're fit enough to do, and then upgrade as you carry on.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. We used to think that there was a minimum time that you had to have, but really any exercise for any time is beneficial. And as you say, you can work up to that 30 minutes and it can be done in blocks.
Yeah. And also the idea is, incorporate all the different types of exercises that we have mentioned before. So, trying to do a little bit of your aerobic training, your strength training, resistance, and flexibility.
Yeah, and balance as
Incorporating all that.
well.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. So this goes back to the point that you don't actually need to go to the gym to exercise. So, I mean, what kind of activities achieve those kinds of exercise patterns?
Yeah, so let's start with aerobic exercise.
Yeah.
Well, when in Victoria, at least when lockdown's over, swimming is actually going to be a very good option
Yeah.
because, it takes a lot of that impact on the joints because you have the buoyancy of the water in the pool. And so you can do more in a pool. So swimming is a really great start, going for a brisk walk, playing a favorite sport of yours. So, maybe badminton or tennis or squash, or even just golfing. But make sure you're not actually sitting on the cart and going around, but actually
Yeah.
walking from one hole to another hole.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What?
What
Yeah.
about strength training? How do we incorporate strength training into our lives without having to
Yes.
go to the gym per se?
Yeah. Yeah. Just shopping. Carrying your shopping bags. Carrying.
I don't do that much shopping, Sabina.
Okay, sorry.
And I do
Fine.
click and collect.
Fair enough. Well, and if you have, for example, if you've got a grandchild, even carrying a grandchild's weight training, you don't
Well,
realize it, but
yeah,
you don't
I
have.
was thinking maybe some home weights, but a grandchild will do. A grandchild in every
Yeah,
yard.
yeah, yeah. Home weights, yes, yes. Not everyone's got weights, but you know what? And that's what I tell some people. If you've got like those water bottles or bags of
Yeah,
rice or whatever it is you have at home, you can use them and you do some
yeah,
weights. You don't
exactly,
have to go and
exactly.
buy dumbbells straight
Yeah,
away.
exactly.
And
So
my
the most
favorite thing
important, oh, go on.
is, oh, sorry, my favorite thing is really push-ups, which you can do on the wall. So you don't actually have to
Yeah,
get on the ground to do push-ups, and
yeah.
that's quite easily doable, and that's good strength training too.
Yeah, yeah. So I think the basic point is that you don't need to go to the gym to be active and to exercise, Yeah, and it can be part of your daily routine. Yeah.
Pretty much, pretty much.
Yeah.
And I guess the one thing I'd like to just add in there is just in terms of balance and flexibility, my favorite is the Tai Chi exercise because
Yeah.
I think it's great for the cognition, for your
Yeah.
brain. It's
Yeah.
good for balance. It's good for stretching and flexibility. So I think that incorporates a lot of that too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So why do we even bother? Why can't we, at the age when we retire, at the grand old age of 60, 65, why can't we just say, right, we're retired now, we're just going to put our feet up and stay in bed all day? Why can we not do that?
Well, that's very simple. The physiological things that happen in our body. As we get older, the fluids in our joints, basically the fluid in our body gets lesser. You lose
Yeah.
elasticity,
Yeah.
and that reduces your joint flexibility and mobility. So, you
Right.
find that you might find it just things are a bit stiffer, your fingers or your knees or your back. You might not be as flexible as you were. Other things that happen as we get older is something called sarcopenia.
So what is sarcopenia?
So sarcopenia is basically progressive muscle loss that happens as we get older.
Yeah.
It starts from about the age of 30 and it happens every year as we get older. Apparently, you lose 3 to 5% of your muscle bulk every year. And if you think about it, by the time you're 60, there is a large percentage that's lost.
So that's quite frightening, isn't it? So is there anything we can do to stop sarcopenia?
Yeah. Well, I guess the first thing is to make sure we are consuming sufficient amounts of protein in our diet. Sometimes as we get older, we just sort of, decline in that and we start eating less amount of proteins because we think, oh, well, we're not working, we're not as active as we were. We may not need to eat as much protein. The second thing is really exercise, strength training,
Exercise.
resistance
Absolutely.
training. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I think this is a useful segue into what people might think of as the andropause. So we all know what the menopause is when women experience decline in ovarian function. And so people used to think that, around about 40, 45, men went into testicular decline. And actually, if you get a group of unselected males and you measure their testosterone level, by the time you get to about 40, the testosterone kind of usually plateaus until you get to the age of 40, and then there's a gradual decline. So that was the basis upon which was made the diagnosis of the andropause. But then they realized, well, actually, if you exclude people who are overweight, if you exclude men who are overweight from this analysis, and you only include men who are of normal basal body mass index, BMI, the level of testosterone stays constant throughout life. So you can have 90-year-olds with normal testosterone. And then they find out that actually the decline in testosterone is directly related to obesity. So if you are not active, if you are inactive with a poor diet, eventually your obesity will catch up with you and you will basically decline your testosterone levels in keeping with the sarcopenia that you mentioned, which then also means that actually one of the reasons why we need to exercise is, first of all, it keeps the weight off, but that in turn will help maintain our testosterone for men, which will then in turn allow us to maintain our sexual activity into old age. So, again, it shows that how important exercise is in our daily routines. Without it, our testicles atrophy. We become less manly, basically, if we do not exercise.
That is very interesting. And I guess that comes down to also, we talk about as we get older, as you were talking about, obesity and things, cardiovascular fitness and lung function also reduces as we get older if we, don't exercise and we are idle. And
again, exercise can reverse those changes. If people have monitored cardiac function and respiratory function in old people, in men and women in their 70s and 80s, who have maintained activity levels, and they have had the lung function and the and heart function of 30-year-olds.
Yeah.
exercise protects organ function, and certainly with heart, lung, and sexual function.
Yeah. And also mood disorders, doesn't it, Virgo?
Yes, yeah, it does. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, are there any? I mean, we've talked about the fact that it's important for the elderly to exercise to protect sarcopenia, or to protect from sarcopenia, to protect from mood disorder. I think one of the other big issues, which is closely related to sexual function, is also bone mass and bone density. Would you be able to say a few words about that?
So, osteopenia is basically where your bone mineral density reduces as we get older. On average, non-sex specific peak of bone density is really about the age of 35. It starts declining anywhere after the age of 50 years old. It tends to happen in women because earlier, depending on hormonal changes, if they hit menopause a bit earlier. But otherwise, the average age of menopause in women is about 51, and that's when we start seeing the decline in bone density.
Yeah.
And there are things that we can do to also prevent this, isn't there, Fergal?
Well, it boils down to exercise, and in particular, weight-bearing exercise. So loading the large joints, the large bones, climbing, walking upstairs, carrying, all of this kind of stuff. Jogging even, that's high impact, but you have to balance the risks of high impact sport with the benefits. But I think it's important to realize that this decline in bone density, as you've described, doesn't just happen in women. It also happens in men if you don't have sexual function, if you don't have that testosterone coursing around your body, and if you don't exercise. So it's really important that we keep active, we keep aerobically fit, and we keep resistance training, and we do load-bearing exercises. Load-bearing exercises are what keeps our bones and joints healthy.
I'd just like to add with that, in terms of the exercises, just, I guess, safety notes, just a couple of safety notes, really. We're advocating for exercise, obviously starting low and go slow and build up. I guess a couple of things that can potentially happen, especially, thanks to most of us having poor posture, lots of us have back pains. And I guess the main thing is also, if you're starting out exercise when you're older, try to avoid doing exercises too much in a flex posture, just because it increases your risk of having more worsening back pains, reducing the risk of fractures, and make sure that there is proper lighting and you're using proper footwear when you're doing these exercises.
Absolutely.
Just to minimize any risks.
Yeah. So as you get older, you're more prone to injury. So you need to be more careful, and you need to start low, go slow. And we've described how we can actually start low and go slow in other episodes. But there is a group of professionals who are expert in guiding and coaching people of all ages in the art of exercise. What is that profession called?
They're called the exercise physiologists, and they're basically a bunch of physiotherapists who are trained, who can actually provide safe and effective exercise programs for people who have multiple, it could be for anyone, really. It doesn't have to be someone with multiple diseases or aches and pains. It can just be for any regular person.
Yeah. Because
Great
being able
service.
to exercise safely is an art, is a skill, and it needs to be taught properly.
Yeah.
Which I suppose is a useful segue, the role of the exercise physiologist is a useful segue into, describing how we would approach exercise for people who are with disabilities or chronic diseases. What would you say to that?
Yeah, so that's it's just a little quick point about exercise and disability. 3/4 of people with disability don't actually meet their the recommended guidelines, and the guidelines are merely age specific, like what we've spoken about in the previous episodes. But of course, if there are disabilities that are preventing them from doing certain things, really seeing the exercise physiologist that they can access through the NDIS in Australia, for example, would be a way to get some help to.
And they're also available under the EPC referrals, under team care arrangements.
Yeah, that's
They're
correct.
subsidised in that regard,
Yeah, and it's so important because if you think about it, certain disabilities come with poor cardiorespiratory fitness, atrophy, like declining in muscle mass and things. So it's really important to engage in exercise.
Yeah, especially
Yeah.
if you are compromised. So again, this point that exercise is not the preserve of the young and the beautiful. Exercise is for everybody. And we need it in our lives to keep us healthy. And actually, to give is not just about adding quality to years, it's also adding years of life as well, isn't it? We know that exercise improves longevity.
Yeah. Tell us a bit more about that, Virgo.
So, well, I mean, there's various epidemiological studies, and there's also now an understanding of the biocellular basis by which exercise causes longevity. So we know, for instance, one study found that if we exercise for 15 minutes a day, we actually increase on average our lifespan by 3 years compared to someone who's sedentary. And we also know that there are risks for not exercising. So we understand the risks of being sedentary shortens our life, and we understand that exercise prolongs our life. We also know that vigorous exercise within reason actually prolongs life more than moderate exercise. So for instance, there was a Spanish study that demonstrated that for every hour of moderate exercise someone did in their 20s, they prolonged their life by about 2.5 hours. But for every hour of vigorous exercise they did, they prolonged their life by about 5 hours. And so that was the payback. There's more of a payback with vigorous exercise, which also then speaks to what we've described before in terms of high intensity interval training. And we know also that exercise on a cellular basis extends our telomeres. So would you explain what a telomere is and why that is important in longevity?
Yeah. So basically, telomeres they're basically caps at the end of our chromosomes.
What's a chromosome?
And our chromosomes basically our genetic material, our DNA,
Right.
basically, to put it very
DNA,
simply. Yeah. And as we get older, these telomeres get shorter.
Yeah.
And what they found is that the more you exercise, these telomeres can actually get longer compared to those who are sedentary. And
So exercise reduces the speed at which telomere shortening progresses, and telomere shortening is closely linked with cellular aging, and as is diet. Diet can also reduce the speed at which telomeres shorten. So the combination of diet and exercise is really the key to understanding longevity and healthy longevity.
so I guess what that takes us to is really that the exercise is not really just limited to the young. It's very important as we get older, and it's particularly important for above the age of 65 and people who also have disabilities too.
Absolutely. Exercise is not just for the young and beautiful. Exercise is for everyone. And on that sweet note, we'll end it there. Savina, thank you very much for your pearls of wisdom as usual. We'll see you next time.
And likewise, Virgil, thank you.
My name's Dr. Fergal Armstrong. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.